Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we have a show that connects dots the mainstream press refuses to connect. From Israeli bombs falling near Beirut's international airport to Trump's widening war with Iran, from crackdowns on humanitarian activists in Tunisia to the quiet scramble for fertilizer, these stories aren't separate. They're chapters in the same book. Maya, let's start where the bombs are falling right now. Israeli warplanes hit Beirut's southern suburbs, the Dahia, strikes landing dangerously close to Rafik Hariri International Airport.
That's right, Alex. And I want people to understand the significance of striking near a civilian airport. This isn't a battlefield. This is a densely populated urban area where families live, where commercial flights operate, where the infrastructure of daily Lebanese life exists. Middle East Eye is reporting multiple strikes on the southern suburbs, and what's critical here is the pattern. Israel has systematically targeted Dahia since the escalation with Hezbollah, but hitting near the airport signals something deeper, a willingness to cripple Lebanon's connection to the outside world.
And let's talk about what that means strategically. When you bomb near an airport, you effectively shut it down without technically destroying it. Airlines won't fly in, insurance companies pull coverage, and suddenly an entire country is cut off. We saw this playbook in Gaza, where Israel destroyed every point of entry and exit before the ground assault intensified. Lebanon is now watching the same news titan. The question nobody in Washington is asking, because nobody in Washington wants to ask, is under what legal framework are these strikes occurring?
None that holds up under international law, Alex. Striking civilian infrastructure, even if you claim military targets are nearby, violates the principle of proportionality under the Geneva Conventions. But here's what the mainstream media won't tell you: these strikes are happening with American-made bombs, dropped from American-made jets, with real-time American intelligence support. Every crater near that airport has a Made in the USA stamp on the munitions that created it. The complicity isn't hidden. It's just ignored.
And this connects directly to our third story tonight. Middle East Eye is reporting that the Trump administration is now scrambling to find alternative fertilizer supplies from Venezuela and Morocco. Why? Because the war with Iran, a war Trump launched alongside Israel, has disrupted global supply chains. Iran is a major player in petrochemical production, and when you bomb a country's industrial base, the shockwaves hit American farms in Iowa and Nebraska. This is the part of war they never put on the recruitment posters.
Let's break that down for our viewers. Fertilizer isn't glamorous, but it is the backbone of global food security. The United States depends on imports for a significant portion of its fertilizer needs, and Iran's role in that supply chain, both directly and through its influence on regional shipping routes, is substantial. So Trump starts a war, and now American farmers face rising input costs, which means higher food prices for every American family. The administration's solution? Go hand in hand to Venezuela, a country they've sanctioned for years, and Morocco.
The irony with Venezuela is breathtaking. This is the same administration that has called Maduro a dictator, imposed crushing sanctions on the Venezuelan people, and backed regime change efforts. Now they need something from Caracas, and suddenly the diplomatic tone shifts. This is how American foreign policy actually works, Maya. Principles are disposable. Sanctions are leverage until you need something, and then they become negotiating chips. The Venezuelan people suffered under those sanctions, and now their resources are needed to clean up Trump's war mess.
And Morocco is equally telling. Morocco's role as a fertilizer supplier ties directly to the occupied Western Sahara, where phosphate mining, a key ingredient in fertilizer, happens on territory that the International Court of Justice says Morocco has no sovereignty over. So to fuel American agriculture disrupted by an illegal war on Iran, the U.S. is now deepening economic ties that reinforce Morocco's illegal occupation of Western Sahara. It's colonialism subsidizing militarism. Every layer you peel back reveals another injustice.
Now let's turn to Trump's broader Iran strategy, because the South China Morning Post published a devastating analysis this week. The headline says it all: Trump's Iran gamble won't advance his prospects at home or with China. The piece references British military strategist Michael Howard, who said the purpose of forecasting wars isn't to get it right, but to avoid getting it terribly wrong. And Trump has gotten it terribly wrong. He posted on Truth Social bragging that Iran's navy is gone, their air force is gone, their missiles are being decimated.
But here's what that chest-thumping ignores, Alex. Destroying Iran's military hardware doesn't achieve any strategic objective that benefits the American people. What is the endgame? There is no declared objective, no congressional authorization, no exit strategy. The South China Morning Post analysis nails it. This war doesn't advance Trump's position with China, which is supposedly his primary geopolitical concern, and it certainly doesn't help Americans at home who are dealing with inflation, crumbling infrastructure, and a healthcare system in crisis.
And the China angle is crucial. While the United States burns through billions in munitions over Iran, China is building trade relationships, investing in infrastructure across the global south, and positioning itself as the reasonable alternative to American chaos. Every bomb dropped on Iran is a gift to Beijing's narrative. They don't need to say a word, they just point at the destruction and say, "We build, they destroy." Choose your partner. Trump's war is accelerating the very multipolar shift he claims to oppose.
The article also raises a question nobody in the American press will touch: why did Trump launch this war? Nobody has a clear answer. Was it to distract from domestic failures? Was it a gift to Netanyahu and the Israeli right wing? Was it driven by the same neoconservative advisors who brought us Iraq? What we do know from the South China Morning Post reporting is that this wasn't a response to an imminent threat. This was a choice. A deliberate escalation that has destabilized an entire region and put American service members at risk.
Which brings us to the human cost that gets buried under strategic analysis. When we say Israel hit Beirut's southern suburbs, we're talking about neighborhoods. When we say Iran's military is being decimated, we're talking about young conscripts, not the regime leadership sitting in bunkers. War always kills the people with the least power while the decision-makers remain insulated. That's true in Tehran, it's true in Washington, and it's true in Tel Aviv.
Now let's shift to our fourth story, because it reveals the other weapon being deployed in this conflict: the suppression of dissent. Middle East Eye reports that Tunisia has detained 7 activists connected to the Gaza flotilla movement. These are people who were attempting to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza by sea, challenging the illegal blockade. And instead of being celebrated as humanitarians, they're sitting in Tunisian detention cells.
This is a story that should outrage anyone who believes in the right to protest and the right to provide humanitarian assistance. The Gaza flotilla movement has a long history, going back to the Mavi Marmara incident in 2010 when Israeli commandos killed 10 activists aboard a Turkish ship. The movement exists because official channels have failed. The UN has called Gaza's conditions unlivable. International courts have questioned the legality of the blockade. And when ordinary citizens try to act where governments won't, they get arrested.
The Tunisian angle is particularly disturbing, Alex. Tunisia was the birthplace of the Arab Spring. It was supposed to be the democratic success story of the region. And now its government is detaining humanitarian activists. The question is, under whose pressure? Tunisia has been courting international financial support, including from Western institutions. When you follow the money, you often find the explanation for why governments suddenly crack down on activists who challenge Israeli policy. Economic leverage is the quiet enforcer of the status quo.
And let's connect this to the broader pattern. In Lebanon, you have bombs falling. In Iran, you have a full-scale military assault. In Tunisia, you have activists being silenced. In Washington, you have an administration scrambling to find fertilizer because their war blew up supply chains. These aren't separate crises, this is a system operating as designed. Military force abroad, suppression of dissent at the periphery, and economic consequences managed by squeezing yet more countries into compliance.
That systemic view is exactly what's missing from mainstream coverage, which treats each story as isolated. CNN will cover the Beirut strikes for 90 seconds, mention no context, and cut to a commercial. The New York Times will run the fertilizer story in the business section with no connection to the war that caused the disruption. And the Tunisia detention story won't make American news at all, because 7 activists in a North African country don't fit the narrative framework that American media operates within.
Now I want to briefly touch on our second story, because it might seem out of place but it reveals something important about how governments manage public attention. The South China Morning Post reports that 94% of Hong Kong students aren't getting enough exercise, and 17.5% are overweight. The government is framing this as a health crisis requiring school and parental intervention. And on the surface, it is a legitimate public health concern.
But the context matters enormously. This report comes from Hong Kong authorities, the same authorities who have systematically dismantled civil liberties, imprisoned pro-democracy activists, and reshaped the education system to eliminate political dissent. When this government releases a study about student fitness, you have to ask what narrative purpose it serves. It shifts public discourse from political repression to personal responsibility. It says the problem with Hong Kong's youth isn't that their freedoms have been stolen, it's that they're not exercising enough.
It's the classic authoritarian playbook: depoliticize the population by medicalizing social problems. Students who might otherwise be organizing, protesting, questioning power, are instead told the issue is their screen time and vegetable intake. And I'm not dismissing the health data. Childhood fitness is genuinely important. But the framing, the timing, and the source all matter. A government that crushed a democracy movement is now positioning itself as concerned about children's well-being. The hypocrisy is staggering.
And there's an economic dimension too. The report flags excessive recreational screen time, poor diet, and sedentary lifestyles. These are symptoms of a broader economic system that produces cheap processed food, designs addictive technology, and structures daily life around consumption rather than community. Hong Kong is one of the most expensive cities on earth. Families are working grueling hours in small apartments. Kids aren't inactive because they're lazy, they're inactive because the system they live in is designed to maximize productivity, not human flourishing.
That structural analysis applies globally, Maya. American kids face the same crisis. But no government, not Hong Kong's, not Washington's, will address the root causes because the root causes are profitable. Processed food companies, tech giants, and real estate developers all benefit from the status quo. So instead, we get reports that blame parents and schools while the industries creating the problem continue unchecked. It's accountability theater.
Let's bring this full circle, Alex. What connects Israeli strikes on Beirut, Trump's war on Iran, the scramble for fertilizer, detained activists in Tunisia, and a health report from Hong Kong? It's this, in every case, the powerful act in their own interest while ordinary people absorb the consequences. Lebanese families flee their homes. Iranian conscripts die. American farmers pay more. Activists sit in cells. Hong Kong students are blamed for a system designed against them. The pattern is consistent and it is global.
And the media architecture that's supposed to hold power accountable instead fragments these stories into disconnected segments that prevent the public from seeing the pattern. That fragmentation isn't accidental. A public that sees each crisis in isolation is a public that can't identify the system producing those crises. That's why shows like this one exist, not to give you comfortable narratives, but to force the connections that power wants to keep hidden.
Let's talk about who benefits from all of this. The Beirut strikes benefit the Israeli defense establishment and the politicians who need perpetual conflict to maintain power. The Iran war benefits weapons manufacturers, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, whose stock prices rise with every missile fired. The fertilizer scramble benefits commodity traders who profit from supply disruptions. The Tunisia detentions benefit governments that want to signal that challenging the blockade on Gaza will have personal consequences.
And who loses? Lebanese civilians who did nothing wrong lose their homes and their sense of safety. Iranian citizens who had no say in their government's policies lose their lives. American families lose purchasing power as food prices climb. Humanitarian activists lose their freedom for trying to deliver aid to people under siege. Hong Kong's youth lose both their health and their political voice. The distribution of costs and benefits tells you everything about who this system serves.
The South China Morning Post analysis on Trump and Iran is especially important because it comes from a perspective outside the American echo chamber. When they point out that this war doesn't advance U.S. interests with China, they're highlighting something American analysts are too embedded to see, that the United States is engaged in strategic self-harm. Every resource poured into the Iran conflict is a resource not spent on competing with China economically, technologically, or diplomatically.
And that's perhaps the greatest indictment of all. Even by the cold logic of great power competition that Washington claims to follow, this war makes no sense. It weakens America's position, empowers its rivals, destabilizes its allies, disrupts its own economy, and produces no achievable strategic outcome. The only framework in which it makes sense is one where domestic political calculations and defense industry profits outweigh national interest. And if that's the framework we're operating in, then we need to name it. This isn't foreign policy, it's a racket.
As we've reported, Middle East Eye has been invaluable in documenting both the Beirut strikes and the fertilizer supply scramble, showing how war creates cascading economic consequences. The South China Morning Post has provided essential analysis from outside the Western media bubble. These are the sources doing real journalism while much of the American press operates as a stenography service for the Pentagon.
So here's our call to action, and I mean this directly. First, seek out the sources we've cited tonight: Middle East Eye, South China Morning Post, independent journalists on the ground. The mainstream American media ecosystem is structurally incapable of telling you these stories honestly because its business model depends on access to the very power structures it should be scrutinizing. Diversify your information diet or you will be kept ignorant by design.
Second, contact your elected representatives and demand answers on 3 specific points. 1. Where is the congressional authorization for war with Iran? The Constitution requires it. 2. Why are American tax dollars funding strikes near civilian airports in Lebanon? 3. What is the administration's plan to address the food price increases caused by the supply chain disruptions their own war created? These aren't radical questions. They're basic accountability.
Third, support the organizations on the ground. Support the flotilla movements that challenge illegal blockades. Support the journalists in Beirut risking their lives to document strikes. Support the legal funds for activists detained in Tunisia. This system sustains itself through our passivity. Every dollar you direct toward independent media, humanitarian organizations, and legal defense funds is a dollar that weakens the machinery of impunity.
And finally, reject the fragmentation. When you see a story about Beirut, connect it to Iran. When you see a story about fertilizer prices, connect it to the war. When you see activists detained, understand it as part of the same campaign of suppression that drops bombs and manipulates markets. The powerful want you overwhelmed and confused. Clarity is resistance. Understanding the system is the first step toward changing it.
I'm Alex Truth. This has been Truth Report. The stories they separate, we connect. The questions they won't ask, we ask. And the accountability they refuse to demand, we demand. Stay informed, stay critical, stay engaged. Good night.